I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Well, I'm honored to have the two of you here. We met years ago at the Festival of Education, which was great conversations. You told me about this book, and then I saw it, at least the PDF version of it. And I thought, what a great title and what a great cover. And then it turns out the content is great too. But I thought Change Starts Here. The whole power of it is pretty cool. And what you've done is you've constructed, adapted a model for change, the double diamond model, and then you've built it into 8 stages of change. And then you've added questions for each of the stages. So I thought what we could do is we could go through each of the stages and then pick one question and talk about it and just go back and forth. And I'm hoping to learn a lot about change because I need help. So I'm hoping you can be helpful. So it's great to have you here, Shane and Ephraim. I'm really excited to have the conversation get rolling.
What an absolute honor to be on the pod and excited to share with you, Jim.
I thought maybe what we could do is we could just talk about I'm always interested in the origin story of this book. So maybe Shane, I'll start with you, and then Ephraim, you can tell us more. How did this book, where did it come from? How did it come to be?
It's a great question to start with because Ephraim and I wrote this book without having ever met each other. So that's like the first point. Actually, for us to kind of rewind back, I used to be a head of teaching development across a big group of schools and was working with a lot of schools on kind of improving their systems, improving their professional development, and found that sometimes the natural stance that was being taken was a kind of a push into school model, like from our central. And yet where I found I had most influence was actually when I worked with the school and asked them, what's important to you and how can I support you? And that's where the power was coming. And this for me triggered this thought process of how are schools interacting with those outside their walls, and what does that interaction look like? So I started down a bit of a path, just starting to ask questions online at the time and on LinkedIn at the time to people saying, is anyone else wondering about where the power lies in terms of decision making? Is the power slowly shifting from within the school walls to outside? Is there a challenge here? And Ephraim reached out. We'd never met. You reached out and said, Shane, I think I got some ideas, but you were coming from a slightly different position, weren't you, Ephraim?
Yeah, it's funny to hear you say it. I know we speak about it occasionally around this topic, but from my side, I was coming fresh out of a new leadership position. I was taken on as, in the UK, they call it the sixth form. So I was running a sixth form, and I'd been working as a teacher, and I'd seen the struggles on the ground quite like viscerally. And when I went into the position of leadership, I noticed that those decisions that were being made at a leadership level often ignore those on the ground. And it was this feeling that not only are our expectations coming from so many different people and so many different perspectives. So you've got here in the UK, you've got Ofsted, which is the regulating body for schools. You've got the school community, which is a team of parents and former students, and the community that shapes. And you've also got the students themselves, you've got teaching staff, you've got so many different various expectations coming in. And I was fascinated by the fact that the moment you go into leadership, it's almost this feeling of you forget where you were a few years back, and it wasn't intentional. It just sometimes it just happens to be. And I wanted to see if that would happen not just in our school that we were working in, but across other schools. And I started digging in a little more, and it was that time when I met you, Shane, and it was this brilliant overlap of interests, and we were hitting this feeling, this raw feeling, this visceral feeling of frustration and just not feeling of being heard by the staff and the schools, and not being necessarily valued and seen in the way that maybe external consultants were. And it was that I think we started that thread that we started to pull on together.
So let me get this straight. So you met through email or through social media somehow? That's how you met? That's the first, you didn't work together, know each other. Ephraim, you saw Shane ripping it up on social media and you wanted to be a part of the magic. Is that what it was?
I, I think I was new to LinkedIn. It was quite fresh. I'd met someone and I'd just left working the school, and I was thinking these ideas are so much broader than just one person. And I was reaching out to as many people as possible. And Shane fell for the bait, I think. He went for there. He responded to the message and we said, let's jump on a call. And I remember it vividly. I was in Florida, I was visiting family, I was looking over the ocean. And it was, I think, 1 o'clock in the morning there. And I just wanted to speak to Shane. I didn't know anything more. I found out afterwards that he had a podcast, quite a well-known podcast, but at the time I had no idea. I just happened to reach out and I saw he was speaking about the exact topics that I was so curious about. And I remember it. I remember it vividly. It was one of those moments that sort of will stick with me for the rest of my life. It was just looking over the ocean, hearing the waves, and speaking to Shane and thinking, 1 second, this is surreal. Someone's speaking about the same topics that I've been so fascinated about.
I say it was the perfect first date, wasn't it? Like,
The perfect first date. There you go. And out of this comes this wonderful book. Now, the book is built around the double diamond model, which I think comes from design, not often applied to education, but you took the model and you applied it. So I'm wondering, Shane, could you talk about the double diamond model and then give us kind of a quick overview? And then Ephraim, maybe you could tell us more about how you adapted it to make it work in the school context.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time, like, to give a bit of background, so I'd just done a course in organizational development coaching. So I was interested in coaching. I'd followed your work for a long time, Jim, and dabbled in instructional coaching and leadership coaching. But I was interested in this idea of, how do you coach an organization? How would you coach a community to help them make really great decisions as a community for themselves? And yet, when I did this program, where I learned so much over a year, but the model that they tried to kind of frame it within was so complex, as you would imagine for an organization, how complex organizations are. Like, the complexity of then trying um, to kind of coach through a process in that was quite complex, and it never really resonated with me. So it sent me on a bit of a hunt for something that I felt would encapsulate it better. And there are lots of models for change out there for schools. Like in the UK, they have the Education Endowment Foundation's model for kind of implementing change. A great model. But again, there was something about that. There was something missing, and a simplicity that I felt like it was difficult to grasp on. And it was when I was having a coffee with a friend, a lecturer, Ola Hanford, a lecturer at Shanghai University in design thinking. She said, Shane, have you looked at this design thinking model? Would that not be a useful framing? And we came across this idea of the double diamond model. So in design thinking, this was a model created by the British Design Council back in 2015. And the idea is if you can picture two diamonds next to each other, and you start at the left, you go out, and then you go in. You go out, and then you go in. And the idea is it's all about expanding your thoughts, expanding your ideas to the widest area, and then contracting to come to something, and then expanding and contracting. This really resonated with me at the time, because this is the exact process you go through with coaching, don't you? Like, you're with a client and you get them to look at possibilities, and then you get them to come down. And I thought, well, that's great. Rather than create a new model, would this be useful? So the double diamond is in 4 stages. If imagine you're going through a design process, you start off with discover. That is 4 Ds in this diamond. So discover, which is going, we think we know what the problem is, but what could the problem be that we're trying to solve? Are we sure that's the problem? Is that the real problem? And then you define it. So you go, okay, based on all of those potential problems, which is the one we want to work on? That brings you to the middle of the model. Then you go wide again to develop, what could we do to solve that problem? What options do we have? So you go really wide with those options, and then you contract at the end, deliver. How are we going to deliver on that solution? I just think that's such a powerful, simple model, and it really surprised me that I'd not seen it so much in the education space.
This was the first time I've seen it. In fact, I'm pulling up the image here so I can look at it right now. But I do think it's such an interesting model. And then what you did is you took it and you modified it to make it work in your book, and you expand, I think, refined it and expanded it to make it more applicable to educational change. So, Ephraim, what were the modifications you made to the double diamond model? If people want to see
So
it,
it's
they
great.
just have to buy the book, is what it is. Change starts. Go ahead.
You're giving away too much. I feel like someone's now going to say, "Oh, we heard the podcast. We're good to go."
That's right. That's right.
For us, it was a great conversation starter, because I remember after that call that you had, that we spoke, and we had booked in after that first date. We ended up saying, let's meet on a regular basis, and we had those weekly sessions. And I remember you were buzzing. You came back and you were so excited about this model, and it's like, I think this is going to frame a lot of our conversations. And we we came back to it, and the first point of the model was this assumption that we go straight into discovering. And I remember we said, well, actually, there's a stage before that. Usually when it comes to human-led change, or it comes to any sort of process, there's a human involved in the loop, and humans are complex. And to just say, okay, straight away we're going to go and discover, we first need to have a level of understanding. And usually when it comes to those types of conversations, or when it comes to conversations around change, especially for an organization, like what Shane was alluding to, is I'm coming from, I guess, a slightly different background with consulting, professional consulting. And there's so many models and there's so many different approaches that can come across in a very top heavy way, where this is what it is, and we sort of make that assumption and we just follow that assumption through. Whereas what we discussed, it was the power of coaching, and the power of being curious. And if we come in with the first stage and we're not just assuming we can go straight into discovery, but actually we're going to realize that that initial stage is someone's coming in with a perception of what they think the challenge is, as opposed to what the challenge is. And it's one perception, it's not, and we call that the sponsor's perceived challenge, where you're coming in with a perception of what you think is the starting point of a conversation, but it's just a starting point and there's a gateway in. But before we do any of that, we must and we have to connect and listen and learn and be open to the fact that we don't necessarily have the answer or the assumed answer, but rather we're coming in with the ability to listen. And that curiosity is what really sparked that first stage of the double diamond model. And it's what shaped that adaptation from the double diamond to being quite rigorous as a design process to a human process, and going from an idea of certainty or assumed certainty to an idea of curiosity, and trying to understand, when we're connecting with another person and we're trying to bring them along for a change process, is it our idea or is it the idea that we can do together, we can work on together? And that that reciprocal nature, that partnership, was very much in tune to what we'd learnt from you, Jim, around, the partnership, the power of partnership, and in instructional coaching and just in coaching in general, the ability to ask good questions. And we said, well, with this model, how do we open it up to greater questions? How do we ensure that we're not coming with our own assumptions as we bring in this model and saying this is it, but rather this is an exploration. This is an opportunity to explore more. And that just opened us up, and we're thinking, well, if that's the case, how do we take our model and we think longer term about the steps that we all need to be able to get there? And if we were to just go from that perceived challenge at the very start of it, and I know it's a visual thing and someone listening might not be able to see the hand motions and everything. Hopefully, like you said, they'll see the book as well. But the expansion, the ability to connect, happens alongside the ability to discover. If someone's closed off, it's very hard for them to feel like they're capable of sharing, or they're wanting to share. But if we're connecting with someone, then we could think about those possibilities. Um, Shane, do you want to jump in with the next part? I know there's more to that.
Yeah, for sure. So if you was to think about the double diamond, so you had the discover, define, develop, and deliver. Each one we attached a more human-centric word to. So like as Ephraim mentioned there, the discover links with connection. So actually, are we connected as a community before we can make a decision? And then as you're defining, well, if it's a human choice, you're also aligning a group of people around an idea as well. So it's not just the definition is useless if everyone's not aligned around what that definition is. So that align came with that. And then in the center is that goal, similar to the design council's double diamond. But then if we go into that second diamond, as we go wide into developing the idea, well, we've got humans. And when we're developing ideas, that's going to take a lot of learning as well. So we added learn to that, because there's going to be a lot in that moment of exploration of what could we do, where you have to be vulnerable and to say, well, what don't we know? And who needs to help us with this? What do we need to learn to move forward? And then as we deliver at the end, it's really important that delivery is not the end point, but we're looking for sustainability. We talk about, Ephraim and I talk about this idea of resonance throughout the book, resonant change. That, like, imagine I was hitting that. I've got a lovely little Tibetan bowl, and when we were first talking about this, Ephraim, I was like clanging it in our call, and it's the idea that when you hit this Tibetan resonant bowl, the frequencies resonate through time, and you want change to do that. You want change to resonate through time and to last, but you also want change to resonate with people. You know, have you ever said, Jim, like, oh, if an idea, you like an idea, you go, that really resonates with me. It's because it sinks in to you as a human. And when you're leading change in schools, you want that resonance. So we end the model not just with delivery, but sustaining the model towards that sustained solution. That was kind of the idea. And we were dead lucky, because the British Design Council, very giving, they open source their models so that other people can use it and adapt it and change it. And so we've kind of really taken that, rather than, we could have come up with our own framework, I guess, and come up with a nice little acronym, and AI could have helped us with that, I'm sure, but this felt just like a much more natural process.
So, but you gave up the 4Ds. 8Ds would have been pushing it. Did you try to come up with that? I mean, you got discover, define, develop, deliver, and connect. I don't know what the D would be for connect. So
yeah, we
you
didn't
had to
even
let it
try.
go. You had to let the letters go. But discover is connected with connect, and so we need a relationship. But the relationship is around discovering where we are, what we want to look at, how we want to proceed. Then we figure out what we want to focus on, and ensure there's alignment between the change leader and the colleagues on the team, however it works out. And then it's developing and learning, figuring out what are we going to do, and learning what we have to learn to do it, and then implementing, delivering, and sustaining it is the process. And what you've done, and I love it, and I think just for the questions alone, the book is great. What you've done is you've come up with 5 sort of guiding questions for each of those 8 components: the connect, discover, define, align, develop, learn, deliver, sustain. And the first one's connect. And I wondered if you could tell us what that's about. And if we have time, we'll try to go through as many of these as we can go. What do we mean by connect? And what's a question we'd offer? And we'll just go back and forth. So maybe Shane, you can start, and then Ephraim, you'll go back to you, and then we'll go back and forth, or the other way around if you like. But whoever'd like to go first, please take off with connect and give us a question and why you chose that question.
I'm excited to talk about this, because actually, whenever we speak about this, Ephraim always speaks about the connect state. So this gives me a chance to
Good.
to sit in that space. So connect is really important to us. Do you know, actually, we've talked about, we did talk about when we were writing the book. We could have spent the whole time right at the beginning of this process just talking about connection, because it is so important. And when we looked into research and we read widely, we found that a lot of change, and we know so much change. What's the percentage, Ephraim? It's like 70% of change fails, right? The big McKinsey report. Like, we know so much change fails. And when you dig into a lot of the time when this change fails, it's something that is not secure in the team dynamics, or something about the group of people who are implementing the change. Maybe people are not bought in, they're not trusting each other. We're thinking about Amy Edmondson's brilliant work on psychological safety. Like, there's a lot of work that happens before a change starts. And we were very keen, as we were thinking about this model going forward, to think, how are we going to create a process that people can go through a change and not just implement that change more successfully, but implement every change in the future a little bit better, because they've created better foundations. So the connect stage is at the start of every change, and it's about assessing the ground and going, How are we? How are we as a team? What's our appetite for change? Have we had change done well? Have we done change well before? What happened? Have we really messed things up before? What happened? Have we ever disagreed really badly? How did we react in that situation? Because guaranteed we're going to have challenges along the way. So we need to kind of assess that. And our very first question of the book, actually, and these questions are, you would never really go through from start to finish and ask every question in a team meeting. That might be a little bit strange, a little bit artificial, but they're provocations that might get you thinking in a different way, thinking divergently, perhaps. The first question is, when was the last time you truly felt heard? And this is certainly one of my favorite questions in the book, because what you really want to do at the start of the change is to get an understanding. If you're wanting to go into a community-driven change where everyone's involved, you need to know, how are people receptive to change and what's been that experience in the past. You will likely find, when you ask people a question about when did you last feel heard, that you're going to have some people who feel very well heard, thank you very much, and they're quite good at raising their voice and getting their voice heard, and some people who don't feel that they get listened to very much, or some people who would like to be listened to but maybe don't feel that they ever get the opportunity to talk. And these are really important questions, because if you're about to go into a collaborative process or a community process where you want everyone to not just buy into the solution, which we kind of feel buy-in is a bit of a problematic phrase, but you want people to be invested and feel like it's their change that they're going through, well, you're going to need their voice at some point, and therefore you're going to have to survey what their experience of being heard is in the past. So that's kind of the first question and the starting point in the book.
So the questions could be used to bring a group together and give them a chance to reflect on maybe one or more of the questions, look at different components. As a leader, I could use the book as almost like a personal reflection and go through each 40 questions, jot some notes down, or just talk it out in my head, or talk it out by recording it. You could use them in lots of different ways. But what I like about this question in particular, and many of the others, is it's not an intellectual question and it's not a behavioral question. It's both. So you feel your answer as much as you think your answer. Oh, I know what it felt like to feel really heard. And then that naturally leads to, what's the next thing I can do to build those kind of connections? Because when that person really heard me, I felt a sense of connection with them. Sort of, you allow us to discover, which is our next word, but you allow us to discover what's the behavior and what's the wording behind the thinking and the behaving. So it's very cool the way it works. Ephraim, the second question is discover. So tell me about the discover stage and the question you've got primed up for us.
I think what you said is so brilliant, that there's this interconnection. It's this almost, they're not separate from each other. They happen simultaneously. When someone feels comfortable and confident and heard and connected to what they're doing, they're more likely to want to share, and they feel more safe to share. But to be able to discover, often, and going back to the stage before connect, which is that where we start from, is often a perceived idea of what we think is going on. And often with change, like Shane was saying, it almost happens under the surface. There's this perception around what we're going to do, and we'll jump to the solution, and we wonder afterwards why it didn't last, or why after a couple of years it's no longer there. And the reason often behind the scenes is because the people who that change is affecting don't feel like it's theirs. So when we are bringing on change and we're thinking about change, is it our change or is it the collective's change? And the individual on the ground, when they feel that they're personally invested in this change or the process that we're going through, then their perspectives and their ideas are more willing to be out there in the open. So my question, the question I've really been thinking about a lot, has been, what would happen if we did nothing? To me, the reason why that question highlights the power of discovering is because to really discover, to connect, to really understand that there's that interconnection between the two is this my idea? And am I pushing for something that maybe isn't what's really going on under the surface? Or is there something deeper that's under the surface that maybe others feel we've missed the point? This isn't what we're looking for. Maybe it's something else entirely. And being open to that is really a key. And I do want to say one thing that, just taking it back a little as well, is these questions are not, we're not saying these, you go through it methodically and say these are the
Right.
questions that you need to go through. It's more the idea around how can we make this for the person who's listening and reading it, how can we make it something that sparks that provocation, that sparks thoughts, ideas, curiosity. And this is a spanner in the works a little. We started a change process. We're saying we're going to be going down this route, and we're very early on putting on the brakes and saying, 1 second, what would happen if we did nothing? And that for me is the power of it.
I love the definition of that question as a spark question. That's what I found. I first heard it from Susan Scott a long time ago. Hers is slightly different. She says, "What if nothing happens? Is that okay?"
Mm.
And I found that as an interesting coaching question. I had one person where I said, "What if nothing happens? Is that okay?" And she said, "Yeah." So it was kind of a interesting spot. You always expect the person to go, "No, definitely, I want to change." But she said, "Yeah." So then we had to kind of realign the nature of the conversation. I'm just going to read these questions here. I won't do them for all, but I think they're cool what you've done, and you've drawn them from other people. You mentioned Michael Bungay Stanier, for example, his "What's the real challenge here? What else?" Michael said when he wrote the book, The Coaching Habit, he actually had over 100 questions and had to keep refining it down to just the 7 that are in the book. What if nothing
Wow.
happens is the second question. What are we missing? Um, are we actively seeking other views? And then lastly, what if we played devil's advocate, or what if we tried to look at this from a different perspective? I love those as the discover questions. We can't go into all 40, but I think each of those, you can see that helps the person discover what's going on, and it's really, really helpful. So the third thing is define. Shane, what have you got for us on define? What's happening there, and what's your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, we've gone wide, we've thought of possibilities, and now we're trying to define. We're not trying to define the solution. We're still in the mode of defining what is the challenge we want to solve. And it's funny because I think when a lot of people we've spoken to and a lot of changes that Ephraim and I have seen, and speaking to many people, a lot of the time people jump straight from the beginning of the model, like perceived challenge, all the way to developing a solution. Or maybe sometimes all the way to delivering a solution before it's even been developed. This is a really normal process. And maybe in schools that happens a lot because it's really fast. So here we're actually just saying, okay, can we define what our goal is? What is our community goal? What are we trying to achieve? And there's a few questions that can help guide that. But I think one of the core questions is one I've heard you say in different ways, Jim, in when you're in the coaching conversation. But if we could wave a magic wand, what would we want to see, hear, and feel? And you talk about this in your, like, when speaking with a classroom teacher. But this question, I think, is super useful because it takes you from what do I want to do to what do I want to see change, like to actually what changes if this thing was solved. And it also allows you to explore possibility rather than exploring within a restrictive mindset. Sometimes we live within our schools and we see our restrictions, that it can block us to possibility. And at this stage, we're just trying to go, well, if we could, what would we do? And what does that open up? Maybe then we have to go, okay, the reality is X, Y, and Z, and we have to bring it down a little. But if we could wave a magic wand, what would we see? What would we hear? What would we feel? What would actually change? And sometimes that question can shock you a little bit because maybe actually you're realizing you're implementing something and you're not actually sure on the actual change that's going to be there, and you can't articulate that. And that might bring you, as a leader or as a community member, a question of going, well, am I really going to be able to help people come with me through this change if we're not actually sure what we want to see in the end? So this is helping you take that step back, if you like.
I love it. And it's a solution focused question. It's saying what's the vision we have for where we want to get to? How do we want to get there? I don't want to hold us back too much, but I like the question, do our feelings match the facts? Tell me more about that question, Shane. What's
Oh,
going on there?
it's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because you mentioned earlier in this chat as well about feelings and what we think and what we feel. And hopefully throughout the book, people notice that we try to give as much attention to how people are feeling, to the logic of change, if you like. And because it's when we are making decisions, we know that we're not just driven by logic. What are the, in Star Trek, what are they called? The logic people. And I'm not sure. I'm not a big
I'm
Trekkie.
Star Wars, Ephraim. I'm not, or Shane. I'm
Oh,
not
you're
Star Trek. So
you're a Star Wars guy. Yeah, they're much better character. But like the Spock, and they're just logic characters. Well,
right.
human beings are not. So sometimes when we look at a model, and I think there's some great models for change out there, sometimes it can be so much about the technicalities of change and what we think we should do, and we're ignoring what we feel. And yet when we're in the decision making place, or when we're thinking of buy-in and we're thinking of our energy around delivering a change, it's often really tied up in how we're feeling at that moment. And we might go, how often do we know we should do something? I should have gone for a run this morning. I didn't much fancy it. I wasn't really feeling it, and there was a motivational element. And I think sometimes it can be useful. We talked about, there's a few checkpoints in the book, really, isn't there, Ephraim, where we ask the reader to go, okay, you might be looking at your evidence and everything might point to this direction, but how are you feeling about it? Where are people sitting with it? Because if people have got a little bit of a knot in their stomach about this going forward, and it might be based on something prior, or someone's really energetic about it, you might want to know about those feelings in the team, because that's going to really help propel your change forward.
Well, I think what I was thinking along those lines is that this work sometimes is sub language, like it's happening at a level we're not even really conscious of, understanding the experience of change for people. They may not be able to put it into words or describe it, but they know there's a misalignment between the head and the heart. So asking people about that might show you things you otherwise might not see. I thought that's such a great question. Now Ephraim, you're on to a line. So what can you tell us about a line, and what's your question there?
I think just if I can touch on the point you just mentioned and connect it back to this, I think the power of in Australia we call it data or heavy data, and I know you've got your book, Jim, which is a brilliant way of framing that. But the power of those feelings and being able to frame it in what's going on. But unfortunately, we can get so absorbed with our own way of thinking, what we think the facts are, what we're looking at from one very specific lens, that we can fail to see it from another lens. And a line is very much about recognizing that there's multiple perspectives here, and recognizing that if change were to occur, it can't just be one perspective that's driving it. And we might be able to say, yes, we've asked everyone and we've done the surveys and we've ticked those boxes, but to genuinely celebrate the voices around, there's another challenge in that completely, which is, how do we move past just box ticking exercises and saying the right things, but actually feeling those perspectives and seeing the value in those perspectives. And for me, Matthew Syed is I think he's a table tennis champion for over 10 years in the UK. He wrote a brilliant book. He's written a few incredible books, Black Box Thinking, but the book that I'm quite obsessed with is Rebel Ideas. And for me, that was quite an eye-opening experience, seeing how he describes the way that we can, without realizing it, segment all our decision making into one small group of people, and we don't even realize we're doing that sometimes. And yes, we might have some incredibly intelligent and wise and experienced leaders who might be driving those changes, but what Matthew Syed looked at in his book was the power of diverse thinking. And if we can, even if everyone were to give their perspectives in a conversation, the quality of the output is far exceeds one or two people in a very small group in isolation. He does his visuals that he has in his book, which are brilliant. Like, you got this room and you got this little corner of the room and you got this person there, and it's showing the impact of that, and he's backed it with research. It's quite a powerful powerful point. But we can say all the right things, and in our book we do try and and address that when we have these little boxes, and what do most people mean when they say this, and what has that become sort of common language, whereas what we mean and what we really hope people can start to question around those words, even the word change itself. Um, but yeah, going back to your question about align, the question that really, I think, highlights that is the first of that section, which is, what would Joe say? Now, the first thing that people are wondering is, who the heck is Joe? Where does Joe come in? And the idea is that when we get caught into our own way of thinking, it can feel so natural to see this as the reality. Whereas when we imagine ourselves in the perspective and the shoes of someone who's within our organization, it immediately takes us away and realizes actually there's more that's going on here. And not just saying that we've heard perspectives, but actually imagining what they would say in this scenario can take us away from our own way of thinking for a moment, even for a moment, just to capture that.
Well, that's very cool. And I love the fact that you're emphasizing celebration too. I think we as a team have underestimated the power of celebration, but we've been reminded of it many times. John Campbell emphasizes the power of celebration. This coach I work with, who was a magnificent coach, celebrated it. So I think celebration's a key thing. And even having a vision of what the celebration is going to look like can be helpful. Sometimes that's a crucial part of it too.
Mm.
Develop is our next stage, Shane. So over to you. What have we got for develop? What's happening there, and what's your question?
So develop again, we're going wide again, but this time we've got our goal, we've got a community goal, and then we're going to go wide and go, what could we do to solve this goal? And there are many things you're going to look at this stage. But one of my favorite questions, 22 in the book, it's, what do we already have in the pantry? Now, I'm just going to check this word, like in the Canadian context, the America context, the pantry.
I don't know if pantry is Canadian so much, but it's definitely American. People talk
Okay.
about pantry, and I mean, if you live in Canada, the U.S. is going to spill over, so you're going to hear the vocabulary from the U.S. It's such a big neighbor that people are going to hear what you hear. But yes, I'm fully aware of what a pantry is. It's a place where you have all your spices and other kinds of food are up in the pantry.
That's right. You've got loads of stuff in the pantry and you have to go through it because sometimes you forget what you've got in there,
Right.
right?
That's a
You've
good
got
point.
so much stuff. So we in thinking about developing solutions, before you get really excited and go, we could do this, we could go and get this new thing, we could jump onto this, you might want to just open the door of that pantry and go, hang on a sec, what are we already doing? And not just what are we already doing now, but what are those little things that are hidden in the back that maybe started 5 years, 6 years ago, that some of your staff remember, some of your staff won't have experienced? Have we done this before? Because I don't know about you, but I've been in, when I worked in schools, I've been in that situation where a new thing is being brought in. This leader's coming in and they're bringing in this new thing. This is what we're going to do. And you go, didn't we do something similar a few years ago? Wasn't this just that repackaged? And in education, people talk about this cycle anyway of like different things coming in and, repackaged in different ways. So sometimes it can actually be useful to go, well, what do we already have? Both in what have we done before, but also what people around have had experience of this particular thing before. Do we need to jump to an external solution? Do we need to find someone outside, which often you might do, and this would be the right time to explore that for sure? Or is there something inside that we might want to build on? What what we often find is that when you're going into a change, you're going to have a lot more success if you're building on foundations of something that exists already than if you're bringing in something brand new wholesale. And usually there's something in your school that it might build on. And that could be, you might frame that through, what do we have in the pantry in terms of a thing that we've done similar, but it might just be, what do we have in the pantry in terms of the way we approached change in the past? That might be, we are going to implement a new phonics program, but 2 years ago we implemented that new maths program and that implementation went really well. Should we check in how that was implemented and what works there so we can kind of build on some of those things that work?
Jim Collins has that idea of get the right people on the bus. And when we set up what we call them intensive learning teams with schools, we were bringing people together to rewrite the curriculum, redefine the curriculum, think about the assessments, put it all together. And I was very conscious of making sure the people in the room were people who are constructive and supportive and who could do a lot. So, and who were committed to the project.
Mm.
And I was working with this other person, Ethel Milkovitz, or Ethel Edwards, sorry. And Ethel, there was one person I said, I don't know that she has the level of commitment that we need. I don't see it. And she said, if we invite her into the room and she becomes a part of it, she's going to blossom. It's not exactly what her words were, but something to that effect. And sure enough, that's what happened. The fact that she was in there co-constructing unleashed a lot of potential in her. And so to me, this is kind of a coaching question, not just what expertise do we have in the system, but what does each individual have that we haven't recognized? That's why I love this so much too. Now, the next one's learn, which is what we're all about. So Ephraim, what are your thoughts about learn? What question do you have for us there?
So I think the learn stage is often where, if we were to compare this to what would happen on a regularly or not normally, in there's no real regular, because obviously every situation would be different. But often when there is a change process, often it's, well, we need to go get outside support. And at this stage is actually probably the optimal stage, which is, halfway, almost to the end of this process. And we're thinking, well, what do we know and what don't we know? So the question I'm going to go with is who knows more than us? It's recognizing what we've been able to achieve as a community, as a group on our own, and then asking ourselves, well, who does know more than us? And the 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 question, I think, is quite powerful. We draw from Guardiola. That's how we say it in Australia. I don't know if I've pronounced his name the right way. Um, and yeah, there's a great book. Where they speak about the power that he held in his football team, in his soccer team, as they say outside of the UK. And it's this feeling of he is and he was, and across his teams, constantly curious, and he was asking the people around him always to, you know, asking them questions and genuinely trying to understand their perspectives. I've heard this from some incredible leaders in education as well, is they'll often go and ask the people that you least expect when they're going to think about change process. So they'll ask the caretakers because they have a unique perspective on what goes on. They'll go and ask the teaching assistants, who often get forgotten in these processes, but they'll also go and ask perspectives from their own team and think about, well, what don't we know? What is something that we can learn more about? And that question, I think, ties in quite nicely with the previous question, which is one of your questions, Jim, around scaling, about scaling questions, where if we could think about on a scale of 1 to 10, and I know I've jumped in with 2 questions, so hopefully it's all right. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do we know and how can we 1+? And I think these questions are quite interlinked, because if we can really understand the power of scale questions, as you brilliantly put, like if we could think about the approach of continuously learning, and we are always learning. It's just the nature of us. The numerical value isn't so important. It's more about what that represents for us and why that represents
That's very cool.
what it
The
does.
scale, I can't take credit for it. I learned that from Steve Barkley, and I'm sure he learned it from other people. When you read solution-focused coaching or other approaches to coaching, scaling comes up, but I've even incorporated it in my going to restaurants now. So I'll say to the server, this pork chop, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best pork chop you've ever had and 1 being the worst, what rank would you give to this pork chop? And then you can see the person kind of like, how truthful should I be in this circumstance? So I have incorporated scale into a lot of different things. So the last 2 things are deliver and sustain. So Shane, just fairly quickly, give us a question for deliver, and then Ephraim, just a question for sustain.
Sure. So we're in delivery. We're all go now. We're choosing what we're going forward to. And the last question of our delivery, Pat, is actually who will tell us if we mess up. And it links a little bit to what we said before about having that person in the room, having that member of staff who sits in the corner of the staff room moaning at initiatives and bringing those in. But it's actually going, when we're in delivery mode and we've gone through a process, we may, as leaders get this all the time, we have got so many biases. We've got confirmation bias over here, but we also have like this optimism bias, like where it has to work, right? And like we're going forward now, we're committed to it, so it has to work. So you need to go, well, I'm fallible, therefore leading this change, and I need to have people around me. We need to have people in our team. We need to know, where do we go to figure out as we mess up. And we put if we mess up, but it's going to be a when we mess up, really, isn't it? In most changes, you're going to mess up several times through the change. And ideally, you've got a good feedback system. And this is actually why, to bring all the way back to the beginning of the change process, why we start with connection, because building those connections, building that psychological safety is going to be so important when we get to this stage and we go, actually, we're going to ask people to start picking apart some of what we're doing. This is going to be so important, because a lot of change can fizzle out so easily at the end, because one thing goes wrong and everyone gets a sour taste in their mouth, or something goes wrong and it all just kind of fizzles out and nobody talks about it. A challenge gets raised, and how many projects just seem to naturally disappear. We're recording this just going into a new school year. This is like that classic time where there's some things that kind of didn't work last year and they didn't have the responsive feedback mechanisms in place. So some leaders just kind of, let's just not talk about that again and let's just move on to the next thing. Ideally, you're wanting responsive feedback as you mess up, as you go.
Ephraim, you get the last word. Sustain is your word. What's your question there?
The question I have is the last one in the book, and I love this question. I think it's, of all the 40 questions, it's probably my favorite. And it's, are we done or just getting started? And it's the power of being able to frame change for the person who's going through it. And they're thinking about, are they absolutely just exhausted from this process of change, or do they feel invigorated to do it again and again and again? And that will tell you a lot about their personal response to change and how much it feels like it's theirs. Because if it's theirs, yes, it will be challenging, it'll be difficult, but it's theirs, and they'll feel that, and they'll hopefully be chipping away a little more about their feelings towards doing it again or doing something similar.
It's a great question, but they're all great questions. 40 great questions to help you reflect on the change, grounded in your double diamond explanation of the process. I loved the book, as I put in my little blurb about the book. I really loved reading it. It is, I'm almost thinking you need to create a little, here's the 40 questions, and you can pick one each day and think about it or something, some little handbook like that to go with it. Because I really like using these questions kind of to reflect. It's like the I Ching of change or something like that. We can process where we are. The book's called Change Starts Here. It was launched over LinkedIn, created by Shane and Ephraim. Shane's also the co-host of Coaching Done Well podcasts. So hopefully we'll see you both again really soon. I loved our last meeting. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you so much. What a cracking conversation.
It was fun, great fun. And I'm looking forward to what's next. I don't know why I'm so blurry. That's a little bit of a problem, but I'm very much looking forward to our next conversation. Take care.